time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
The night was supposed to be polished, controlled, and untouchable. A royal gala, a glittering guest list, and a palace machine built to make every second look effortless. Then King Charles saw one face in the security line that should never have been there. Harry stood waiting to be cleared, and in that instant, the king did not hesitate. He cancelled everything. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles did not speak at first. He simply stared at the live security feed, his face tightening as the corridor outside the gala entrance moved in cold, careful order. A royal gala, for anyone unfamiliar with the term, is a formal palace event where senior members of the family appear before guests to show unity, power, and tradition. That was why this night mattered. After weeks of private tension, the monarchy needed one perfect evening. It needed calm. It needed discipline. Instead, the monarch saw his son standing in the security line like a man testing a locked door. Harry looked calm from a distance, but nothing about him felt casual. His jaw was clenched. His eyes stayed fixed ahead. He did not look like a guest, surprised by procedure. He looked like someone who knew every second mattered. The security line, the checkpoint where guests are cleared before entering a protected royal space, had suddenly become the most dangerous place in the building. One step forward would turn a private family wound into a public royal crisis. One wrong movement would make the entire room feel like a stage. A senior aide leaned close to Charles and whispered the sentence that changed the air. Harry's name had not appeared on the approved guest list that morning. The aide repeated it softly, almost afraid of what it meant. The monarch's hand moved to the table, slow and heavy, as if the weight of the crown had dropped through his body. He was not only seeing a son, he was seeing a breach. He was seeing a warning ignored. Charles lowered his voice, and the room around him seemed to shrink. Stop the gala. No shout. No debate. No second chance. The order moved faster than panic. Staff froze. Security tightened. The music died before the evening had even begun. Harry remained at the edge of entry, close enough to be seen, too far to be welcomed. But the deepest shock was not that the king closed the door. It was the question burning behind every silent face. Who had allowed him to reach it? Behind every royal decision, there are faces that must carry the damage. Charles was not just a monarch that night. He was a father forced to choose between blood and control. William was not just the heir. He was the man expected to protect the future. Camilla watched the room shift around her, while Harry stood outside, suddenly no longer a guest, but a crisis. Charles entered the private holding room moments before the cancellation order moved through the palace. His aides waited with stiff faces, each one aware that this was no ordinary delay. A holding room is a private space, where senior royals pause before appearing at a public event. And that mattered, because the king was supposed to walk from there into unity, not disaster. He had come ready to show strength after weeks of family tension. Instead, he found himself trapped between a father's ache and a monarch's duty. William had arrived early because he already knew the night carried risk. Security had been tightened after earlier family disputes, and the prince understood why that mattered. One uncontrolled entrance could turn a royal event into a public wound. One familiar face in the wrong place could make the entire institution look weak. He looked toward the entrance corridor and asked quietly whether Harry had come to talk, to confront, or to force everyone's hand. The future king did not raise his voice, but everyone heard the fear beneath the control. Camilla noticed what others missed. When Harry's name was spoken, one aide looked down instead of looking at Charles. The queen consort saw the small movement, and it unsettled her. She had watched enough palace storms to know that silence often carried more danger than speech. Her eyes moved from the aide to the king, then back again. Something about Harry's arrival had not surprised everyone in the room. That was the part that made her go still. Harry remained outside the main entrance, held back by the same security system that had somehow allowed him to get close. A guest liaison finally admitted, in a tense private exchange, that his arrival had been expected by someone inside the palace, but not formally approved. A guest liaison is the staff member who helps manage arrivals and approved access, so that admission mattered deeply. It meant Harry had not simply appeared out of nowhere. Someone had opened a path, then stepped into the shadows before the blame arrived. Charles removed his glasses and set them beside the guest list. The paper lay in front of him like proof that the evening had already broken. He looked once toward William, then toward Camilla, and his silence said what his face refused to hide. Harry's sudden appearance had cut deeper than protocol. It had touched an older wound, one built from distance, mistrust, and too many private warnings ignored. The king finally spoke. "No one enters now." The words were quiet, but they landed like a lock turning. William understood at once. Camilla understood too. This was no longer confusion. This was suspicion. If Harry had reached the security line with help from inside, then the danger was not only outside the doors, it was already within the walls. And to understand why one appearance could destroy an entire royal evening, the story had to return to the moment that made Harry's arrival unforgivable. The gala was not the beginning. It was the explosion after a fuse had already burned through the palace floor. Weeks earlier, a private conversation had ended with a warning so clear that no one could mistake it. Harry had been told where the line stood. Charles had made it personal. William had made it final. And still, Harry came. Charles had agreed to the Clarence House meeting because pressure had been building from every side. Clarence House is a royal residence, used for private meetings and official family business. And that mattered, because this was not meant to be a public drama. It was meant to be a controlled conversation before damage reached the gates. Harry wanted a limited return to selected royal events, arguing that the family looked divided and that one careful appearance could calm the public mood. The king listened, but the father inside him heard something else. He heard a son asking for access before trust had been repaired. Harry pushed harder than anyone expected. He spoke about unity, duty, and the need to stop the family from looking broken. But William sat across the room and watched every word carefully. The prince understood the danger in Harry's request. A royal event is never just a gathering. It is a public signal of who stands inside the circle of trust. If Harry returned without clear boundaries, the monarchy would look unsure of its own rules. If Charles allowed emotion to lead, every past warning would lose its force. The direct trigger came when the written boundary agreement was placed on the table. A boundary agreement, in plain words, was a document setting limits on where Harry could appear and what approval he needed before attending royal events. Charles expected argument. He expected pain. But he did not expect Harry to refuse it outright. The younger prince looked at the paper, stood before the monarch had finished speaking, and left the room with the agreement untouched. Charles felt the rejection like a blow. This was no longer a disagreement about schedules or appearances. To the king, it felt like Harry had rejected his authority as both father and sovereign. William watched the door close behind his brother, then told one aide in a documented palace account that trust could not be rebuilt by forcing doors open. The prince's words stayed in the file, because they captured what everyone feared. Harry still wanted entry, but not surrender. Charles made the warning clear before the meeting ended in memory. Harry was told not to appear at major royal events without written clearance. A sealed note from that conversation was later placed in the palace security file, which means the warning was formally recorded for protection and future reference. That detail mattered because it removed every excuse. No confusion, no soft misunderstanding, no room to pretend the gala was harmless. So when Harry appeared in the security line, Charles knew instantly what he was seeing. Not a lost guest, not a son arriving in hope. He was seeing the return of an unfinished confrontation, brought to the very edge of the royal doors. And that confrontation could no longer remain hidden behind locked rooms or softened by palace language. The cancellation had already been ordered, but the true breaking point came in the corridor. Harry was not escorted away immediately. He was held at the threshold, close enough to hear movement inside, far enough to understand he had been stopped. Then William appeared. No crowd, no cameras, no speeches. Just two brothers facing each other in a silence heavy enough to crush the night. Harry stood in the side corridor with anger held tightly behind his eyes. Security had moved him away from the public line, while Gala staff paused every guest entry. And that mattered, because the palace could no longer pretend this was a simple delay. A security line is the checkpoint where people are cleared before entering a protected royal event, and Harry had reached it without official approval. That meant the family crisis had almost become public before Charles could stop it. William left the private room because the king refused to meet Harry at the entrance. Charles knew one face-to-face moment in the wrong place could turn pain into spectacle, and the prince understood why he had to go instead. He was not there only as a brother. He was there as the future king, carrying the duty to protect the institution when emotion threatened to break through the walls. William walked toward Harry with controlled restraint, but the silence between them was already burning. Harry demanded to know why a family event had become a locked gate. His voice stayed low, but humiliation sharpened every word. He said he had come to attend, not to attack. He said the family could not keep shutting him out and then blame him for standing outside. But William did not soften. The prince reminded him that he had been warned clearly, and that choosing the gala entrance was the most public way to test a private boundary. Harry then said the words that changed everything. Someone from inside the palace had told him his entry would be handled quietly. He described the message in detail, saying it promised a calm clearance, no confrontation, and a small path back into the royal circle. William's expression shifted. The wording sounded too close to an internal briefing, a private palace note shared only with a small group. An internal briefing is a confidential update given to trusted staff or senior figures, and this one was never meant to reach Harry. William stepped closer, and Harry stepped forward once. The security officer between them stiffened but did not move. Then the prince raised one hand, not in anger, but as a warning. Harry stopped. The officer stayed frozen until William lowered his arm. In that tiny pause, the old brotherhood felt buried under years of damage. No shouting was needed. The wound was already loud enough. William asked who sent the message. Harry refused to name the person at first, saying only that he had been told the door would not be fully closed. The prince understood what that meant. Someone had not simply offered comfort. Someone had turned a family wound into a palace operation. The confrontation ended without a scene, but the danger had grown. Harry had not arrived alone in the story anymore. Someone had guided him toward the threshold, and once William carried that detail back to Charles, the cancellation became more than an emotional reaction. Power inside the palace rarely announces itself loudly. It moves through lists, clearances, sealed rooms, and names removed before anyone notices. That night, the decision belonged to Charles, but the machinery behind it was bigger than one father's heartbreak. Aides waited. Security froze. William studied the access trail. And somewhere in the system, one approval had appeared where none should have existed. William returned from the corridor with one detail that changed the entire meaning of the night. Harry had not spoken like a man guessing his way through the entrance. He had spoken like someone following instructions. That mattered, because the gala had been built around control, and control depends on knowing exactly who enters, who waits, and who is stopped. A security clearance chain is the record of approvals that allows a person to move through protected areas, and now that chain had a break in it. Charles remained in the private room with Camilla, while senior aides brought updates one by one. The king looked more exhausted with every report. This was no longer only a father hurt by a son's sudden appearance. It was a monarch facing the possibility that someone inside his own household had opened a door without permission. Camilla sat beside him without reaching for his hand, because even comfort felt dangerous in that room. The queen consort understood what the cancellation had become. It was not just a family wound. It was a test of royal command. William studied the access trail with a cold focus. The prince asked for every log, every name, every timestamp. An access trail is the digital and written record showing who approved movement through secure palace spaces. And that mattered, because it could reveal whether Harry had been helped. Then the detail appeared. A temporary clearance marker had been placed beside Harry's name, then removed after the gala was stopped. It had existed long enough to move him forward, but not long enough to survive easy blame. Charles heard that and went still. The king did not need anyone to explain the danger. A temporary clearance marker is a short-term approval used to let someone pass security for a limited purpose, and it should never appear beside a name without proper authority. William realized the marker could only have been entered by someone with trusted palace access. The prince looked toward the aides, and the silence that followed felt sharper than accusation. Camilla watched Charles as the reports kept coming. She could see the personal pain turning into something harder. The queen consort knew the monarch had cancelled the gala to protect the crown. But now the decision threatened to expose weakness inside the very system meant to protect him. Charles was not only asking why Harry came, he was asking who believed they could move around the king. Charles signed the cancellation notice with a slow hand. A cancellation notice is the formal message used to stop an official event and explain its end to staff and guests. And this one carried more weight than any speech. The king pushed the pen away when he finished, as if the ink had cost him more than he wanted anyone to see. William stood nearby, silent but watchful. Camilla looked down, uneasy and pale. The doors closed. Guests were turned away. Staff moved through the palace with careful voices and lowered eyes. But the damage had already escaped the room. By the time the first cars left the palace gates, the private crisis had become a royal rupture. A cancelled gala does not disappear quietly. It leaves empty tables, confused guests, unanswered phones, and faces trying to hide panic behind perfect manners. Within minutes, the palace was divided between damage control and disbelief. Charles withdrew. William stayed alert. Camilla asked one question no one wanted to answer, and Harry, stopped before entry, finally understood the door had not merely closed. It had closed on him. Harry stood in the side corridor with humiliation tightening every part of him. He had come close enough to hear movement inside, but not close enough to be welcomed. Guests already inside were moved into waiting areas, while staff explained that the evening had been cancelled by direct order of the king. A direct order, in plain words, means a command given personally by the monarch, not a routine staff choice. That mattered, because no aide could soften it. No one could say this was a mistake. Charles had stopped the night himself. Charles retreated into a smaller room and refused to take calls for several minutes. The king needed silence, but silence did not bring peace. He knew the cancellation protected the crown, yet it also exposed the wound he had tried to keep private. Outside, vehicles began turning around as security teams blocked further access to the entrance. That mattered, because the crisis had crossed from family pain into palace action. Every turned car became a sign that something serious had happened behind the doors. William stayed alert, while others looked shaken. The prince asked that every access log be preserved before anyone could edit, erase, or explain away the truth. An access log is the record showing who approved movement through protected palace spaces. And it mattered, because Harry had reached a place he should not have reached. William understood the danger. If the trail vanished, the story would become rumor. If the trail survived, someone inside the palace would have to answer. Camilla watched the room with a hard, unsettled calm. The queen consort asked whether the person who cleared Harry had acted alone. No aide gave her an immediate answer. That silence told her more than a denial ever could. She looked toward Charles, then toward William, and the fear between them grew heavier. If one person had acted, it was betrayal. If more than one person knew, it was something far worse. Harry received the final message without ceremony. He would not be admitted. The words landed with cruel simplicity. He did not shout. He did not plead. His shoulders stayed stiff, but the defeat was clear. For him, the Gala had promised a possible return, even if that promise had come from the wrong shadow. Now it had become proof that the family would stop him before the world could see him standing beside them again. A staff member removed the printed seating plan from the reception desk, folded it once, and carried it out like evidence from a crime scene. A seating plan is the list showing where each guest is placed at a formal event, and this one mattered because Harry's absence had changed the meaning of every empty chair. The palace was not only canceling dinner, it was removing a possibility. The fallout had begun, but reaction was not enough. Charles could close doors, William could protect records, and Camilla could question the silence. Yet one truth remained untouched. Before the palace could speak to the world, the king and his son had to face what neither of them had managed to say. After the orders, the locked doors, and the humiliation, the loudest moment of the night came without an audience. Charles agreed to see Harry for a few minutes, not as a monarch granting access, but as a father confronting the son who had forced his hand. No aides entered. No secretary took notes. The door closed, and the entire palace seemed to hold its breath. Harry was brought to a small private room, after William warned that silence could make the public scene worse. The prince understood the danger, because Harry had already been stopped. Guests were already confused, and every minute without an explanation gave the crisis more room to grow. A private room, in this kind of royal emergency, is a controlled space where personal matters can be handled away from staff, guests, and public pressure. That mattered because father and son could no longer hide behind procedure. They had to face each other. Charles entered alone. He left Camilla and William outside, removing every buffer between himself and Harry. Camilla stayed in the corridor with her hands still, knowing the king had crossed from command into heartbreak. William waited nearby, tense and watchful, because the future king knew this meeting could either contain the damage or deepen it forever. There were no aides inside. No secretary took notes. No palace voice could soften what had to be said. Harry spoke first. He told Charles he had come because he believed the family was shutting him out permanently. He said every closed door felt like proof that there would never be a way back. His voice carried anger, but beneath it sat something rawer fear. Harry had not simply wanted to enter a gala. He had wanted to prove that the royal circle could still make space for him, even after everything that had broken. Charles listened, but he did not bend. The king answered that trust cannot be restored by appearing at a royal event through a side channel. A side channel means an unofficial path, outside the normal approval process, and that mattered because Harry had reached the security line without full permission. To the monarch, that was not courage. It was pressure. It forced a private wound into a public place and dared the crown to react. Harry then admitted the detail that changed the room. He had received a message suggesting the gala could become a quiet first step back into royal life. The message had made it sound simple, almost gentle. Arrive calmly, follow the clearance, avoid confrontation, and let the night soften everything. Charles heard those words and understood the trap. Harry had broken a boundary, yes, but someone had guided him toward it, knowing the king would be cornered the moment his son appeared. Charles stood slowly and placed his hand on the back of a chair. The movement carried more pain than anger. He looked at Harry not as a stranger, not as an enemy, but as a son who had walked into a storm someone else helped create. Then the king said the sentence that ended the argument. "You are my son, but you do not get to force the crown." Harry absorbed the words in silence. Charles did not take them back. The father in him had spoken with love, but the monarch had drawn the line with steel. That sentence became the turning point, because it separated blood from authority with painful clarity. And once Charles stepped back into the corridor, the palace finally knew what message it would send to the world. By morning, the cancelled gala was no longer a private royal crisis. It had become a national image, an empty ballroom, silent gates, and one prince stopped before he could step back into the circle. The palace tried to control the language, but the public saw the meaning. This was not a scheduling problem. This was a family fracture displayed through absence. Charles was shown the morning coverage without a word of warning. He stared at the front pages, and the silence around him felt heavier than any headline. The palace statement had confirmed that the gala was cancelled due to a security matter, and a palace statement is the official wording released to explain royal decisions to the public. That mattered because every word had been chosen to control damage. But the problem was what the statement did not say. It did not name Harry. It did not explain the security line. It did not admit that a father had stopped his son before the doors opened. Harry watched the reaction from a separate residence, visibly shaken as the story moved beyond his arrival. The public was no longer only asking why he came. They were asking why he was refused. That mattered, because exclusion can look stronger than any announcement. The more the palace avoided his name, the more people understood that he sat at the heart of the silence. Harry had wanted a quiet first step back. Instead, he became the face of a door closing in full view of the country. One newspaper front page captured the whole wound in a single image. The headline read, "The night the doors closed," placed above the empty gala entrance and a small picture of security barriers beneath it. The phrase spread quickly because it felt simple, sharp, and impossible to ignore. It turned a private royal decision into public judgment. For Charles, the empty entrance became proof of control. For Harry, it became proof of rejection. A broadcaster framed the story even harder during the morning coverage. In a recorded television segment, the presenter called it the clearest sign yet that the king has chosen monarchy over emotional pressure. That line mattered because it gave the public a way to understand the night. Charles was not being shown as confused or weak. He was being shown as a ruler drawing a boundary. But every boundary has a cost, and this one was paid in family pain. A small crowd gathered near Buckingham Palace before midday. Some defended the king, saying Charles had no choice if Harry had arrived without proper approval. Others quietly asked whether a father should ever cancel an entire room because his son appeared. Buckingham Palace, the main working home of the monarchy, mattered here because people went there when royal emotion became national conversation. They did not gather for the gala. They gathered for the wound. Charles listened to the public reaction with a face no aide could read. Harry remained away from the royal circle, wounded by how quickly the story became less about one entrance and more about his place in the family. The palace had controlled the sentence, but not the feeling. And when the noise finally settled, one truth remained standing where the gala should have been. In the end, the cancelled gala was not about one evening. It was about the line between family and monarchy, love and duty, forgiveness and control. Charles did not cancel because he stopped being a father. He cancelled because, in that moment, he understood that the crown could not survive if its boundaries could be tested in public by the very people who knew them best. Charles allowed no second announcement after the palace completed its internal review. The king knew another statement would only reopen the wound, and silence became his final form of control. An internal review is a private check of records, staff actions, and security decisions after a serious incident. And this one mattered because it confirmed Harry had not been formally approved to attend the gala. No emotional explanation followed. No public family debate was allowed. The palace had spoken once, and the monarch made sure it would not speak again. Harry left the episode wounded in a way no headline could fully capture. He had not been ignored. He had been seen, recognized, stopped, and still refused. That was what made the rejection cut so deeply. The door had not closed because no one knew he was there. It closed because Charles knew exactly who stood outside. For Harry, the pain was not only exclusion. It was the realization that surprise, pressure, and family history could no longer move the crown. William's decision to preserve the access logs became one of the most important moves of the night. An access log is the record showing who approved or changed security movement. And it mattered, because the vanished clearance marker proved someone had tried to create a path for Harry without taking responsibility. The prince made sure the palace could never pretend the incident was a simple misunderstanding. He protected the truth, even when that truth made the family look wounded. Charles carried the heavier burden. The king had protected the institution, but the cost was personal and brutal. He had drawn a line that pushed his son farther away. He had defended order, but order did not comfort him. After midnight, the monarch returned to the empty gala room and looked at the untouched place settings. The silence told him everything. A night meant to show unity had become proof that unity could not be forced. Charles quietly ordered the lights turned off. That small command became the final symbol of the entire crisis. The gala was over. The argument was over. The false path back was over. Harry's future return could no longer be built through surprise, pressure, or spectacle. It would require trust. It would require humility. It would require permission. For the monarchy, the cancelled gala became a defining lesson. Blood still mattered. Love still existed. Pain still lived behind the doors. But the crown survived because even blood had to obey the boundary. There was no final dramatic speech, no public embrace, and no easy repair, only a closed door, an empty room, and a king who chose duty while carrying the pain of a father. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.